And we're back to freecodecamp. This time I'm going to build a 25+5 clock. And after I've reviewed this user story here, I realized that I've used different names here and there for the IDs, so you may want to fix this. But the code that I've created, it works and it sets up the clock. So this is something that you need to fix when you follow my tutorial and you want to have these freecodecamp tests passed. But using the right ID names is not the big issue here. I believe it's setting up the entire thing, and this is definitely working. I'm going to use CodePen, so you can use the code in the video description below. Already said it in the last tutorials, I'm new to CodePen, so I hope that everything is public. It should be, but if there are issues with the link in the video description, let me know in the comments and I'll try to fix them. First up, in our HTML, I have created basically 2 timers. I've called them pause and session, and each are given buttons. And then I have general timer controls for start, stop and reset. And we also need an audio file. You can copy this directly here from my CodeCamp if you want to. Or you can find it on freecodecamp. It's a simple beep sound that we want to have played when one of these timers stops. But I believe I've missed a box here. Let me first call that pause. And I need to use the HTML comment format. So this is the pause, the session, and my timer controls, and finally the audio file. As I've said, I believe I've missed one div right here. Our adjustment buttons, they will be nested in an adjustment controls so that I can style that a little bit better. Same goes for the session timer. We need to nest the adjustment controls. We have nested our buttons inside of an adjustment button div, and this one is also nested in an adjustment controls. Once you've got that set up, we can move on to the CSS part. Let me style the body first. And here I don't believe we have any strict requirements on freecodecamp, so this is up to you to style it further if you want to. I'm just going to give this a basic look that looks somewhat nice. And here I've used the adjustment controls class so that both look the same, so for both the pause and the session timer. I've added simple hover effects. Let us go to the JavaScript part. At first we need to define a couple of variables. I'm going to give them descriptive names. For now the buttons don't work. We need increment and decrement for session and pause. So pause is the top one, session is the bottom one. And I finally realized that I have to change the name here. Sorry about that. So our session timer is obviously this one. So let me change the name. And now we can move on here with the JavaScript part. We need some more variables for our three buttons: start, stop, and reset. And we also need a beep for our sound. And here's where you might have to change the IDs a little bit. As I've said, I've just done that from scratch. And then later on, when everything was set up and recorded, I realized that freecodecamp has used different names for the IDs. But what you need to do is you need to get the element by ID. So here I've used, for example, pause minus time minus left, and time minus left is for the session, and pause minus time minus left would be for the pause timer. So when we get the element by ID for pause time left display, I have to use pause minus time minus left. And once again, you might have to change that here and there to pass the test if you actually want to pass them on freecodecamp. I haven't submitted this myself, as I'm just doing this for my YouTube channel. Therefore, I didn't pay enough attention to the exact ID names. Sorry about that. For increment and decrement, these are our buttons. Make sure that you don't mix them up. Right here for our session increment and decrement button. And the ID for the pause, decrement, and increment button is a little bit different. But let me copy paste this right here. We need to get element by ID for all of these variables, so I can easily copy paste this and then simply adjust the ID value. So we were here for pause decrement button, and in our HTML this was right here, pause decrement. Start, stop, reset, and beep were relatively easy. So now we've got all of our variables set up and we can start taking care of our functions. But before we do, we also have to take care of the time that we use. In our case, we'll use minutes. So we'll have to define first up the defaults for session and pause, which is going to be 25 plus 5. And then we'll have to convert it to seconds. So session length times 60 and pause length times 60. This is now stored in session time in seconds and pause time in seconds. We also need a variable for isRunning, and I'll set it to false by default as our timer isn't running from the get-go until we have clicked on start. And we need a timer interval. I'll leave that empty for now, so we just declare it. And now we can start with our functions. First up, we need to always update our display. We'll set our session minutes, a new variable, to the session time in seconds divided by 60. And then we'll round it down to math.floor. Then we want to check the seconds in our session, and we use the session time in seconds remainder 60. So whatever we've got, we divide it by 60, and this leaves us with the seconds that we need. So now we have minutes and seconds, and we can display that properly. Let me copy paste this from a prepared document. I don't want to have any typos here. Not making any typos is always my biggest challenge. But what we basically do here is we'll set these minutes and seconds to a string, and we need 2 digits. And whatever value we've got here is now being displayed. We need to do the same for our pause timer. So we can almost exactly copy paste this, but we'll have to change the variable names a little bit, as we're now dealing with the pause timer. And once again, I believe it's called break timer in freecodecamp. So don't let pause confuse you here. And finally, we'll use the same operation where we convert pause minutes and pause seconds into a string so that it can be displayed with 2 digits for the seconds in each. And we could basically also use 2 digits for our pause timer if we increment it enough. So this would also be possible. But this updates our display. Let us create the function for our timer start. So starting the timer. First up, I've used an if statement, and we first need to check if our timer is already running. By default, it's set to false, so I have to use an exclamation mark here. This means that is running, if it's true, we'll set is running to true, and the timer interval to set interval. And we'll use our update timer right here. Then we need a function for stopping. And here also we need to check first if it is running. In this case, is running is set to false by default. But if is running is true, we would clear the interval by clicking on stop, and then the running is running would be set to false. So you have to invert it a little bit in your brain, because I've set is running to false by default. So is running needs to have the exclamation mark for the start function and no exclamation mark for the stop. We also have a reset, and if we reset it, we want to have a couple of things happening. Number one is we want to clear our interval. Number two is we want to set is running to false. But we also want to reset our timers. So this is the difference between stop and reset. Stop would basically pause the timer, but reset would set session length and pause length back to 25 and 5. And we also need to reset our session time in seconds and the pause time in seconds. And this is simply 25 times 60 again, or session length times 60. And right here, we also use the pause time and set it to pause length times 60. Finally, don't forget to update our display. And we need our beep sound. It needs to be reset. Number one, it should be paused. So if we click on reset, we won't hear the beep sound anymore. And we want to reset it by using current time equals 0. Let me save it. And we move on to update the timer. We'll start yet again with is running. And if it is running, we have a couple of cases. And it depends on the session time in seconds. As long as this is bigger than 0, we want to decrement our session time in seconds, so minus minus. And inside we have a nested case of session time in seconds equals 0. If this is the case, we want to have the beep sound. So this will make the alarm play. Keep in mind, this is just for the session timer right now. And when this happens, we want the pause time in seconds. We set to pause length times 60. And the display needs to be updated yet again. We also have an else case. And we need to update the display. Don't get that mixed up. The if and else are nested inside of the nested if. And now we are outside of this one dimension and we'll use an else if. And CodePen seems to show me warning messages. Because it needs the condition, I believe, for else if. I'm still trying to figure out how CodePen works in detail. But it should be because of the condition. Let me just add something here. And this warning message disappears. So from time to time this pops up. And now we switch to a pause timer. We check if time in seconds for it is bigger than 0. If it is, we'll decrement it just as with the session timer and update the display. And our else case is that it's 0. And in this case, I also want to have a beep sound playing. So this beep sound is for the pause timer. If this is the case, we want to clear our interval. We also set back our session time in seconds and the pause time in seconds. We need to update our is running. It's now false. And don't forget, we always have to update our display. But that should be it right here for the timer update. Let us move on. We now want to take care of the decrementation and incrementation, so all of the buttons that we've created for the pause and the session timer. And I finally realized that I'm missing some brackets right here. Let me scroll up and check the document, because everything that we do right here should be nested inside of the document. And I can't see my brackets. Now right here I've missed them. I cut them out right here and paste them at the bottom. So everything, all of the code that we have written should be nested inside of this main document in code line 1. Let me indent the rest and it becomes more obvious. Sorry about that. But now we can take care of our buttons. Let us take care of the session first. Session decrement is the -1. And we need an event listener. It's a click. And then we'll need a function that checks if our timer is running and if it is not running. So if is running true, we would set it to false via the exclamation mark, and we only want to be able to adjust our timer when is running is set to false. So when it is false, we then use the exclamation mark to make it true. Session length bigger than 1. We use 1 and not 0 because we have set up our buttons in a way that only allows us to adjust the minutes and not the seconds. So you can't set, for example, 0 minutes and 30 seconds. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to start at 0, as this would set the entire timer to 0. Therefore, we've used a 1. It's a decrementation, so we use --- for the session length. We'll have to set the session time in seconds to session length times 60 again, and we have to update the display. And this is the format that we have to use for the other buttons as well. Let us check the incrementation first. Here we'll have to first up change this one, is running, can stay, but the session length, it needs to be smaller than 60 because we've set up our timer in a way that doesn't allow us more than 60 minutes. So it's a 1 hour maximum for the timer. Session length needs now to be ++, and the rest is fine. Now let us check the buttons for the pause timer. First up, decrementation, and here we need the pause length bigger than 1. We need to change this one to pause length. And it's obviously the pause time in seconds that we're going to adjust, but now this should also run. Now we'll increment the pause timer. So we need to adjust right here. This is also smaller than 60. It must be pause length ++. But the rest is fine again. Now let us move on to our 3 start, stop, reset buttons. And again, we want to have it perform when we click on it. And here we just use the functions that we've set up So for start, stop and reset button, we have created start, stop and reset timer functions. So these will be run when we click on the buttons. And finally, we need to update the display. But now everything should be good. So this one works, but it doesn't work for the pause timer. So I've made a mistake somewhere. And there's a warning message. Let me check that. Here, I've made a typo. I just missed the T here for pause time left display. And now decrementation, incrementation works, so that's fine. Sorry about that, these typos are killing me from time to time, but I think everyone who does a little bit of coding knows what it's like. But yeah, now we're good. This is how I would solve this 25 plus 5 o'clock on freecodecamp. You can check out my code on CodePen. I'll link to it in the description below. I hope this video was helpful, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.